Well, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us for Top 3 Reasons Hybrid Cloud Storage Strategies May Fall Short. I'm really pleased to have a great council of subject matter experts on the line with us today, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But first I wanted to just discuss how you can get the most out of today, and also introduce a benefit for sticking with us through the duration of the session as well. So without further ado, my name is Richard Carson. I'm a partner marketing manager here at SoftChoice, and I have the pleasure of actually working, through and working with a number of our hybrid IT subject matter experts and getting a view across many of the industries we serve as to some of the trends that are going on. As part of the session today, I want to just give you a chance to ask the questions that are top of mind for you, really to get the most out of the time together. You can see at the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a question and answer window, so feel free to chime in there. Also, what we'll be doing is starting to tailor the content a little bit just based on some of the feedback we get throughout the session as well. So you'll see on occasion the polls that will come up throughout the session. Contribute to those. It'll really help us shape the content today. And then finally, as a benefit of attending, not just the insight you're going to gather today, hopefully, you'll also be entered to win a chance to win a pair of Ray-Bans and also a Fitbit as part of a thank you for spending time with us. So make sure you fill out the polls, ask questions, and we'll have a good portion of time reserved at the end to make sure that we get to your questions throughout the time we have today as well. So I wanted to take an opportunity to introduce you to two subject matter experts who are really going to help us through the conversation today as it relates to hybrid cloud storage. On first hand, I want to introduce Oleg. He's one of our Dell EMC technical solution architects here at SoftChoice. Oleg, I probably couldn't do it justice, so maybe you can just give us a little bit of background as to your role and some of your background as well.
Sure, gladly. So my name is Oleg Cooperman. As Richard mentioned, I'm one of our Dell EMC technical solution architects at SoftChoice, supporting our sellers and, by extension, our customers in all Dell EMC solutions. Been in the storage business for about 10 years, and glad to be here and answer any questions you may have.
Great, thanks Oleg. And Michael Lucas is also our AWS practice lead here at SoftChoice. Michael, could you give us a quick overview of your background here at SoftChoice and your role here at SoftChoice?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Mike, and the role of practice lead, there are a few people at SoftChoice that hold this for various practices, one for each technology. So my role is really focused around SoftChoice's AWS practice, what we do for customers, the value we bring, and my mandate is to evolve that practice around our customers' needs. So in the past I've held DevOps engineer positions and IT positions, so I understand from a customer's perspective what challenges they're facing, and I try to do my best to bring that to SoftChoice.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michael. And so we'll reserve some time at the end for Q&A, so feel free to chime in with any questions, and we'll be sure to get to those as well. So before we jump into things, I'll just kind of give you a little bit of a preview of what you'll be getting out of today. We're going to highlight sort of the view of how the world is changing from a hybrid IT perspective, and also put that in context to the protection continuum. We thought it was also really important. I know a lot of organizations may today use some form of cloud platform, but we wanted to take a look at AWS services and give you just a sense as it relates to potentially your protection needs or your data storage needs. What are those relevant AWS services? It's sort of a 101 baseline, but then also bring that into context for how they work together to support a hybrid strategy. We're also going to look to how you start to think about a hybrid solution and how you can actually take advantage of some of the investments you may have from an on-premise perspective and take that out to the hybrid cloud as it relates to data storage. Finally, we're going to wrap up. One of the things we like to do is we've got solution architects, delivery engineers on the ground with thousands of clients across North America. And what we've developed over the last year and a half is really some step-by-step guidance on how you can think about adopting a hybrid IT strategy. And we'll look at some of the key steps that we've seen customers be successful in taking and what things you need to think about there. So that'll be hopefully a helpful takeaway as we kind of exit the conversation today and move to Q&A. Before we get into the nuts and bolts and really dig into more specifics around it, I thought we could, tee up the discussion just with a little bit of a view of how the world is changing. A study here by IDC indicated that generally the mix of IT investments are shifting quite dramatically, and that trend continues on, where we see a lot of the on-premise architectures shifting towards a little bit more of a balanced view of both public cloud and other areas as well. And you can see here, IDC kind of mentions that by 2020, we'll be seeing that shift from 78% today, or 2015, down to 68% of the IT spend by 2020. So pretty dramatic shift, and we see this in our customers too, as they've kind of looked at delivering services in a traditional way. The business demand and the need to help drive some of those key business revenues for an organization, or also deliver new services at a much greater pace, are driving new expectations on IT. And what we view as the way that most organizations, and the data shows it here, is that they're going to be taking a hybrid IT approach. And that, for us anyways, we see that as taking the form of public cloud adoption, taking advantage of those new models, but also transforming the data center to answer back to scenarios where you may want to take advantage of on-premise investments as well. And then the thing that we won't be touching on dramatically here, but recognizing that the network also has to be prepared for new traffic as in this new world. So just a quick stat as we kind of funnel down into the topic at hand today. This continues to drive conversations internally. We can almost all relate with the fact that at the boardroom table, we hear this from a lot of customers too, where sort of the charge has been dropped by the CEO potentially. We've got to go all in, cloud first, everything. And we can see it here that it's this idea that 82% of organizations have a hybrid cloud strategy, and that's continuing to rise. But there are certainly considerations, and that's sort of dropped on any IT leader's lap to figure out what belongs where and how are we going to do that. The reason I kind of bring this up is that it's really important for us to kind of set some context here, and the reason we're actually focused on data storage as a conversation today. We see this as being one of the very first use cases that organizations will typically embrace when they're looking at a hybrid IT strategy, looking at potentially that low-hanging fruit. A study from Aberdeen Group here indicated that approximately 66% of organizations will start to tackle disaster recovery or backup as sort of one of the key cloud initiatives as they look to embrace a hybrid IT environment. So I thought we could first off start with a poll here and ask for you to kind of contribute a little bit to the conversation. And the first poll is really, have you started to adopt hybrid IT? And you think about that, are you sort of in the early stages of transforming the data center so you can kind of get some of those capabilities embedded? Are you actually fully adopted cloud for production workloads? Are you, do you feel like you're operating in a fully enhanced hybrid IT environment? Or many people just aren't sure where they stand in terms of hybrid IT, and they may be in the early planning stages. So I'll give you a moment just to contribute to those polls. Just a reminder, contribute to the polls and make sure you get a chance to get entered in for the draw. But in addition, I'll sync back with some of the results on this as well once we get further into the content as well. So we'll get to some of the results a little later on. As we kind of move through the conversation today, we're going to kind of dig into sort of some of the reasons we see customers stumble in their kind of cloud journey, and also as you kind of think about data storage and some of the scenarios there, we're going to take a look at that as well. So I'll give you just a few more moments to contribute to that poll, and then we'll go ahead and move forward with the conversation here as well. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and close up the poll now. And what I wanted to do was to turn it over to Mike Lucas, our AWS practice lead, to talk a little bit about public cloud adoption and sort of some of the things that we've seen work well, and sometimes where things have gone a little awry. Mike, you want to help us out with a little bit of what you're seeing from your customers?
Yeah, sure. So hey guys, Mike again here. So to start, I want to really sort of outline, the challenge that we're seeing in the industry, within our client base. There seems to be a difference, right? A disparity between what the business is demanding. They need fast delivery of technology. They need advanced technology. They need smoother interfaces. The business is really driving forward, and then they need these things in order to be competitive. But the disparity lies, I think, in now the difference between what the business is asking for and what traditional IT is really designed to deliver. So this difference here, this shaded in area, I mean, it has some names. Some people call it shadow IT, right? But I think in today's world, I think shadow IT is the old term. This is really just the land of opportunity for us. We need to think about this difference as essentially a room for traditional IT to grow, and so we see a lot of companies that are doing this. They're doing their absolute best to bridge this gap and to meet the demands of business, but we find that that they run into a couple roadblocks along the way. So some of these roadblocks might be, for example, that they have no plan. In fact, this is one of the biggest concerns from our customers. They don't know, they don't have a plan to leverage public cloud. They don't have a plan to leverage the technologies that's out there to bridge this gap. So this can result in disaster. If you have no plan, you may be launching pilots and proof of concepts, and they're not working. In fact, as a trend, we see companies try and fail to launch their workloads in the cloud over a period of even as long as 3 to 5 years, and again continually fail because they have no plan. Another way that this could fail is the do-it-yourself nature of cloud. For those of you who may have some AWS experience, you may have seen it. It's built for engineers. So there are certain things that you can do in AWS that aren't necessarily prepackaged and easy to deliver. In a lot of cases, you need to write your own software, build your own processes in order to leverage these technologies. This is the same for Azure, but really the second challenge here is skills gap. Companies, they want to do it themselves. They want to leverage public cloud, but they realize that they have a gap in what they know about cloud and what they know about the technology that's out there and their ability to execute it versus what they need. So it really does seem like a scary statistic here, but we're finding that more than 30% of companies are completely failing in their journey to cloud because they don't have the necessary skills to leverage it. And I think this may be one of the biggest problems here, and in fact, industry research really backs this up. Is these companies' abilities now to manage the spend, manage increasing spend, with great scalability, and apologies for the Spider-Man reference here, with great scalability comes great responsibility. I mean, if you have the ability now to launch compute resources with just the check of a box and the push of a button, it's very easy to run up costs. So companies are running into challenges. How do I control the spend? How do I visualize it? How do I know what I'm, even spending money on? So these sort of problems that were somewhat simpler to solve in the physical realm are now different in cloud, and so it's a new challenge. So what we find is there's these sort of 3 factors that can be applied towards the journey towards public cloud. That can help companies to be successful. One is to really have an excellent plan. To know what your strategy is. How are you going to attack public cloud? Which clouds are available for us to utilize? The other pillar here might be execution. We looked at this the skills gap. More than 30% of companies fail in their journey towards public cloud. Execution can be a problem. So allocating the proper resources for execution, understanding timelines, and variables in adopting your public cloud, and just being able to execute your plan. And, it's a very important aspect here. And then the third, would be accountability. Having the ability to assign cost metrics towards teams, and really just be able to encourage people to be responsible for what they're doing in public cloud, and help them to understand the impact from a cost perspective, but also otherwise, security, operational, the impact of what they're doing in public cloud. And these three pillars are really the core towards innovation in the realm of public cloud. And this is what we try to bring towards to our customers. So with that, I'm just going to pass that back to Rich to wrap up and carry on. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, thanks for painting the picture as to sort of where we see things go awry. But I thought, Oleg, we could get your perspective on this as it relates to bringing it more, zeroing in on the topic at hand, which is really hybrid cloud storage considerations, and what you might think about as you kind of to try and tackle those challenges, especially if this is an organization's first stepping stone towards leveraging the public cloud.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. So I think as we saw and as Mike sort of illustrated, we have three challenges that we see customers run into as they begin to adopt this hybrid cloud storage idea. And that is that with a DIY method, the fact is that lends itself to a lot of human error. And with the DIY method and scripting and kind of writing your own applications, it really kind of we see it taking a long time. And there's definitely vendors, and especially Dell EMC and AWS, that have sort of combined and meshed together in order to give you automation and give you tools that can alleviate a lot of those DIY processes that you may have. Furthermore, we know that customers sometimes go out there without really having a solid plan as to how they're going to begin to adopt cloud, or how they're going to adopt this new hybrid IT plan. And with that, there's definitely some architecture that we have to be aware of, that we have to consider in order to kind of make sure that the plan succeeds and you can be on the other side of that 30% failure rate. And furthermore, when we talk about managing dollars and risk, you have to understand that there's options out there, and a lot of options out there for you. And one of the things at SoftChoice that we can do is kind of help you understand what those options are and be able to recommend and suggest the one that best fits with what your specific challenges and issues might be. And we're going to talk about this a little bit further as we go on, framing it around the idea of data protection and how we can leverage cloud to kind of be able to automate your data protection processes in order to be able to make the best use of the architecture out there and make sure that you understand all of the new options out there for you.
Okay, thanks, Oleg. So when we think about DIY, I thought, Mike, it'd be great if you could kind of give us a little bit of color around what that looks like from a AWS perspective, and what it could be in terms of this build versus automation. So give us a little bit of color around that.
Sure. So coming from a DevOps background, I can tell you AWS, public cloud in general, but AWS it's really powerful when it comes to automation. There's an API for everything. You can very simply build scripts to automate AWS in any way you see fit. And there's a lot of also frameworks out there to help you to do that. But, with that comes some complexity. If you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to start building custom scripts to leverage AWS in certain ways, how are you adding control to that? How are you ensuring that the tribal knowledge isn't playing a negative factor here? What happens if the person that wrote those scripts leaves the company or moves on to a different role, and everybody forgets it's running? How do we visualize this? And the answer is, for most companies, I don't know how to visualize it. We just need it, right? But fortunately, this automation is, it's not just for the layman. This automation can be leveraged by enterprises as well. And you'll see this, a lot of companies are building their tools in support of AWS. Dell EMC is definitely one of those companies. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how Dell EMC leverages the automation capabilities in AWS, as well as how it brings maturity to the game. providing essentially a framework for multiple sets of people with differing skill sets to leverage automation through a single pane, as opposed to custom scripts flying all over the place, and the peace of mind that can bring is really, really tremendous.
Great, thanks, Mike. And I know you love Python more than anybody out there, but and it's reaffirming to understand that we can start to level the playing field. But before we go into more the solution view, let's maybe take a look at, for those that are maybe new to the public cloud game, maybe just a level set on what AWS is and sort of some of the key enabling services underneath that would support a sort of hybrid cloud storage strategy.
Gotta love that mute button, you know?
Absolutely.
Go ahead and evolve the slide. So yeah, I mean, AWS, it's built to meet the needs of the industry. A lot of very powerful features with this. Firstly, the ability to trade capital expense for variable operational expense, CapEx versus OpEx. This can be really, in a lot of ways, something that is forgotten or ignored by IT, but is definitely on the plate for CIOs, CFOs, people who need to strategically purchase their IT and move it around as needed. So the cloud gives us the ability then to leverage capital expense for reserved instances, or again OpEx for on-demand instances as needed and wherever it's strategically beneficial to the company. Other benefits, massive economies of scale. I mean, if any of you out there have ran a software as a service product or have some sort of public-facing application, you understand that the complexities around just the support infrastructure. How do I deploy this and maintain it? How do I make sure it's always up? And the DR. So with the cloud, you're leveraging massive economies of scale. I mean, you can spend $10 a month on a service, and with that $10 a month have disaster recovery and scalability and multi-regional failover and just a tremendous amount of maturity with these products. So additionally, we're eliminating guessing now with our capacity. This really goes along with the scalability factor, and up is not the only direction here. If you think traditional physical infrastructure, you need to purchase a set amount of hardware, and this hardware is, you're expected to last 3 to 4, 5 years if you're lucky, and hopefully you don't have to buy any more, and hopefully you didn't buy too much, right? Well, with AWS, you allocate what compute is required for your application for this specific workload. And if you need more, you add more. If you need less, well, fortunately, commitment is optional. You can just scale down. I've seen companies that have launched very, very large software platforms that would have cost, $1 million a year to run in physical infrastructure. And they've launched these platforms, suddenly realized that they weren't profitable or sustainable, and then very quickly spun them down. So that gives us the ability to fail fast, fail often, and learn very, very quickly from our efforts. One thing I've always said in IT, at least especially learned through my experience in IT, is number one rule: never do something you can't undo. The cloud is great for that. Increasing speed and agility. I've seen infrastructure and applications launched in the public cloud in weeks, not months, not years, but weeks to get things running. And I've also seen it done in days, or less, because AWS is so programmatically accessible. Infrastructure as code is now a term that we can use that's in the industry, and a lot of people are using an infrastructure as code to launch new servers, new load balancers, networking architecture in a perfectly compliant way, very, very quickly. So this agility is, definitely something to keep on your in your pocket, right? Additionally, right, the ability to cut our overhead and focus our costs on just what is strategically beneficial to our application. is also a major benefit. So if we can stop spending money on AC and power and generators and diesel tanks, we can then spend that money on software developers. So this is another great benefit. And then we'll speak to this in a moment, but the ability to go global in minutes, global infrastructure available at your fingertips is powerful. You'll see this slide is actually a diagram of the global infrastructure available to AWS. Each one of these dots is a region with multiple data centers available in each of these regions. So say you had a data compliance consideration that required that you keep certain data in the US and the US only, but then maybe you want to also have data in Canada and keep it in Canada only for PEPETA purposes, or even across the pond over there in London. These are possible. Now you'll notice here Montreal coming soon. Montreal is actually launched. And this image is not even that old. A little bit of a testament to how quickly AWS moves and is seeking to launch infrastructure throughout the world. So now, additionally, AWS has its own theories on storage. Now, there's a lot of separate products and thoughts around this, but there's really three main pillars to the way AWS thinks of storage. This is true across most clouds, but specifically for AWS. So firstly, there's block storage. Now, block storage is what you're used to. Block storage is a standard file system running on a disk. In AWS, this is really manifested as something called EBS, which is a virtual disk that allows you to create a file system on this disk and attach it to your operating system on a server. So operates the exact same way that you expect it to operate, with plugging a disk into a server. Now, EBS, it's fast, but you're paying for storage that you're not using because you pay for the blocks that you're not storing anything on. You're paying for provision. So it's good, but also has its deficits. Secondly, there's the concept of file storage. So instead of thinking, okay, block level, disk level, AWS has services around file-based storage. So a good example of this would be if you have something on-premise, a CIFS or an NFS share, ADFS, these technologies we use to share files across a network. AWS has services, one called EFS, Elastic File System, which allows you to present a network file system, NFS share, to your servers, and just store files on that share. So that can be attached to multiple servers, which is a little bit more flexible than EBS and block storage, right? You can have it on multiple servers. And also, you're only paying for the storage you use in these file storage scenarios. You're only paying for what you're using, not paying for provision. So that's a benefit. But again, it mirrors a lot of the things we see on-prem with standard file shares. Now, thirdly, or I guess tertiary, there's object storage. So object storage is a little different. Not every on-prem network will have an object storage engine, but within AWS, the idea of object storage is to have an abstract system or service that allows you to stream data into objects and access them from anywhere. So that object storage is not necessarily accessible over a network share or local to disk, but it is available through API. It's API accessible. So a lot of companies are building integration to object storage in AWS within their application, such that their applications can interface with it directly without having to go through an operating system. Object storage, I think, is it's advanced, but I feel it's in a lot of ways the future of storage. And so we're going to speak a little bit about how Dell EMC leverages this object storage in a best practices scenario and helps you get to the next level there.
Perfect. Thanks for that sort of scratch the surface 101 view of AWS and some of the services that are relevant. Oleg, maybe you could help us through some of the conversations that you're typically having with clients as it relates to some of the use cases and scenarios.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Richard. So as we kind of talk to customers over the years, what we've learned is really customers tend to have three challenges when they're looking at their data protection schema, and especially the way that it leverages or can potentially leverage the cloud. In these scenarios, right, the challenge for disaster recovery, for example, is things like, just simply needing investment in a secondary site in order to be able to recover to in case of a disaster. For longer term retention with customers as their data grows, we see that the cost of those longer term retention, either because of policy or governance, those costs are rising as well. And of course, protection of in-cloud applications that you may already have running in AWS or in the cloud also need that protection. And of course, I wouldn't be bringing it up if we didn't have solutions for these issues or for these challenges. The first use case that we'll go through is simply how do we protect and how do we leverage the cloud as that DR secondary site, and what are the tools that Dell EMC has that can enable that. As far as long-term retention goes, we have obviously scenarios that can back up to the cloud or can give you long-term retention in the cloud. Not only is this a way to potentially reduce costs of those longer-term retention files and data, but it also maybe will give you less reliance on, frankly, unreliable tape. And finally, of course, there is protection of in-cloud applications that you may have already residing in AWS that would require protection. And of course, all of this can be enabled not only with AWS tools, but with obviously Dell EMC tools that can automate and give you policy kind of policy ways of enacting these data protection schemes.
Great, thanks, Oleg. So why don't we go ahead and move to a quick poll and just get a sense from you as to what your biggest data storage priority might be as it relates to the cloud. Is it, the data, is it the DR in the cloud, disaster recovery in the cloud? Is it this idea of looking at retention, long-term retention scenarios where potentially, you've worked through, the scenario around tape? Are you looking at potentially backup as a service? And finally, looking at in-cloud application protection. So you have some applications running in the cloud, but need to be confident that those are actually being taken care of and future-proof for you as well. And in many cases, a lot of organizations aren't sure where they want to start, but they have specific challenges as it relates to some of the data storage priorities. So I thought while we're waiting for you to contribute back to these polls, I could give you kind of a view as to where people are at in their hybrid IT journey. Just as a reminder, fill out the poll for your chance to be entered into the draw for both a Fitbit as well as a pair of Ray-Bans as well. So contribute to that poll. But what I found really interesting was that just giving us a pulse as to how you actually started, have you actually started to adopt your hybrid IT in your environment. Many people, actually 86% of people joining us today indicated that they're actually at the early stages of transforming and adopting hybrid IT. And then the remainder, generally, we're in the bucket of not sure where I am. And I think this is pretty consistent with what we would hear from a lot of customers is they're sort of at the early stages, or, maybe they know they may have started to adopt, some portion of public cloud, but don't have that fully realized hybrid IT strategy, or maybe tackling it in specific use cases, of which data storage is, as we've seen in some of the other statistics, a really relevant place to start as well. So go ahead, contribute to that poll. I'll also invite you at this point to contribute to the Q&A, and we'll reserve some time at the end to answer some of your more specific questions. So why don't we take that poll down and continue moving through the conversation here as well. Okay, so Oleg, why don't you help us understand sort of the bigger picture and then some of the solutions that might fit under that?
Sure. So specifically around Dell EMC's approach to data protection, well, we like to think of it as it being pretty simple, and that is delivering data protection everywhere. What does that specifically mean? Well, it means that simply enough, you get data protection wherever you need it, from traditional on-premise architecture to a virtual infrastructure to converged infrastructure, all the way out to private, hybrid, or public clouds. The Dell EMC kind of has you covered. for every step of the way. It also means that regardless of your RTO and RPO requirements, from continuous availability all the way up through archiving, EMC solutions really do cover the entire continuum of your data protection requirements. EMC data protection also offers complete choice and flexibility in how you deploy or consume the solutions, from traditional best-of-breed hardware, and again, that's on-premise appliances and software, all the way to converged applications to software-defined or as a service deployments, and of course all of that is available across multiple services. And again, the basic idea here, the bottom line, is that Dell EMC delivers data protection to you where you need it and how you want it. So the first thing that we'll go over, the first scenario, is this cloud disaster recovery scenario. And basically what this means is it's the idea of being able to protect your data from your on-premise data protection solution and be able to take that, take those machines and those applications into the cloud in case of a disaster recovery. In this case, basically, you're just going to protect your VMs directly from your on-prem and replicate them out to your S3 AWS instance. You're going to use your existing Dell EMC data protection environment if you have it. So there's nothing really new to learn. And it's just a simple operational or disaster recovery process. And in fact, all we're doing is migrating VMs to AWS from your latest backup in order to enable that disaster recovery in AWS. Architecturally, this is what happens. What you have is you have your VM backups on premise, again, continuing to use your Avamar and data domain deployment. Then you will install a simple virtual machine that enables that replication out to the cloud. So it's not necessarily your data domain instance that's going to be replicating those VMs and those applications to the cloud, but you're really going to see is the CDRA appliance that you will deploy that will enable that replication. And then you just simply use your Avamar UI in order to enable that replication, in order to recover back to from a disaster out to your S3 instance. Now, of course, there are things that do happen in AWS also that you can see on the right. And Mike, can you give us a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the, I suppose, the conversations that come up when we're talking about DR into AWS is difference in infrastructure. Your on-premise networking versus what networking is going to look like in AWS, and so the power here of Dell EMC's technology is, you can build an environment that is in some ways mirroring or from a network level compatible with your on-premise environment using Amazon's built-in tools like VPCs and things, and then through this this backup, this DR architecture through with Dell EMC's technology, you're able to replicate on-premise VMs into AWS AMIs, so EC2 instances, right? That's the I suppose that's the pair where AWS and VMware link up. EC2 instances are VMs in the same way that VMware has VMs, but they're not entirely compatible. You can't always just throw a file up into AWS and make it run. So the ability then to convert from an on-premise VM to something that is compatible with AWS EC2 and to be able to run that in there is really powerful. And it's not something you can necessarily do with custom scripting. This is definitely it's powerful to be able to launch all of your VMs in the cloud in a mirrored infrastructure environment.
Thank you, Mike. So the next use case and the next challenge that I want to address is the idea of long-term retention, and how do we enable long-term retention in AWS so you can decrease your on-prem footprint for the least accessed files that you may have in your backup scheme. One of the things that we have is with data domain cloud tier, we can scale up to 2x the max capacity of the data domain active tier, which means that your scalability of your data domain system now goes up to 3x of what it normally could hold. So for example, the data domain 9800, which is the most enterprise data domain system, can scale up to 1 petabyte of usable capacity on the active tier. Therefore, its cloud tier can now scale up to 2 petabytes of usable capacity. So when we factor in data domains deduplication, what we're really talking about is being able to protect 100 petabytes of data. That's 100 petabytes of logical capacity being efficiently protected in the cloud, and 150 petabytes of logical capacity being managed by a single data domain system. So additionally, your active tier on your data domain doesn't have to be at maximum capacity in order to leverage the data domain cloud tier. And of course, what this all means is it really means that you can decrease your tape your tapes and make it a more reliable way to store that data. And of course, with the broad ecosystem and the flexible deployment options, we can tailor a solution that best fits your environment. The DD Cloud tier supported on data domain 4000 series, 6000 series, all the way up to the 9800, as well as the data domain virtual edition. And it could work in conjunction with any backup application that is part of that data domain ecosystem. And you can see examples of that on the slide. And of course, data domain cloud tier on the other end absolutely supports a variety of public cloud vendors, including AWS. Now, the next challenge that I would like to get into is, in the next use case, is how do we protect applications that are already living in AWS? As you can see on the screen, although AWS is great at making sure that your data is available, and it's one of the great use cases and advantages of using the public cloud, the protection of that data ends up being the responsibility of the customer. And to that end, here's how we can protect your data in AWS. In effect, basically all we're going to do is just simply deploy an instant of Data Domain Virtual Edition out in AWS Services. And then we can use a variety of backup applications, whether it's Dell EMC's Network or Avabar, or Net Backup, or Data Domain's inherent DD Boost for enterprise app software. We can protect those applications that live in the cloud very efficiently, utilizing all of the features of Data Domain. And finally, as sort of a summary of everything that we've talked about, we do look at this data protection continuum. So all of your data that you may need within 30 days can live on-prem, and you could then leverage the cloud in a disaster recovery sense. In effect, copying the data to S3 and going back to the most recent point in time in case of a disaster. And of course, those instances get orchestrated in AWS. Now, from a long-term retention point of view, again, from a production location on-prem, now we can move less access data that just simply needs to be retained according to policy or governance out to S3. And again, the idea being that we can then go back to much older copies as needed in order to bring those back on-prem for audit purposes or whatever you may need to do with the older files that you have, knowing that they are fully protected in AWS.
Great, thanks, Oleg. So I'll just invite folks to ask questions in the Q&A tab. I see a couple questions rolling in now. We'll be opening that in just a few moments. But Oleg, maybe you can help us through, just sort of wrap it all together for us, and then give us a little bit of a view of what you're hearing from, from both our solution architects and also directly from our customers in terms of their journey and how we're recommending they push forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we talked about this at the beginning, right? This idea of what are the challenges, what are the obstacles that we have to public cloud adoption and to really making your IT departments become more become more responsive to the business needs. And again, we understand that with the DIY method, we can really run into some pretty major roadblocks to making a successful public cloud adoption. But with automation that we have, not only with Dell EMC, but into AWS, we see we can overcome that roadblock and be a lot more successful with our deployment of a hybrid IT strategy. Again, the idea of not having a plan and just sort of throwing applications out into the cloud and hoping they work is really not having a plan at all. And as we see, we have architecture and deployment models available that can help you with the data protection needs, whether it's to be able to burst data out into the cloud for longer term retention, or protecting your applications that you have identified that can live in the cloud and make sure that your data is protected. And finally, we can manage the dollars and the risk by taking some of the load off of the on-premise workloads and moving those maybe into the cloud. And again, taking advantage of everything both that we have from Dell EMC on-prem and from AWS out in the cloud. And of course, as some of the thought leaders that we have here at SoftChoice, we can help you along with these stages of hybrid IT adoption. The first stage that we can kind of look at is this idea of gap analysis. What do you have today and where do you need to be? And then we can look at the financial impact of those and be able to make decisions right along with you and be there with you to advise on how we can move forward in this journey. Next, we can get you started, maybe looking at some production workloads, or accelerate some learning that you may have or that you may need about the public cloud adoption. Of course, we can also give you that roadmap with a longer term strategy and how we can plan for a successful execution and rollout of a hybrid IT strategy. And again, a more detailed financial impact. From there, how do we actually migrate the data? Where do we go from here? How do we manage risk, and how do we measure success to make sure that this strategy is well thought out and well executed? And of course, once we have things in the cloud, how do we optimize the performance and the availability of your public cloud adoption? And of course, we do that with every step of the way by first giving you a detailed inventory, maybe going back to contracts and procurement to make sure that you're started in the right way, all the way up to mentorship and insight and support when we begin to optimize your strategy and optimize your deployment. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you have to start with the gap analysis and move very deliberately up the scale. You may already have your toes dipped in, as we saw 86% of you do, already have your toes dipped into this cloud adoption. And so we can begin at any of these stages and work right along with you to make sure that you have a very successful deployment of your public cloud and your hybrid IT.
Great. So back out to the poll now. As Oleg kind of outlined, this is generally how we've seen people successful in taking advantage of the hybrid IT, journey and being successful in that. If you were to look at where you're at today, why don't you give us a sense of where you're at? Is it gap analysis? Are you just getting started? Are you just trying to figure out building a roadmap, or perhaps you're in sort of the migration or even optimization state at this point? Feel free to hone in on those kind of topic points. I'll just kind of reflect back on our last poll in terms of the greatest, what's the biggest data storage priority that you would look at for the public cloud? And the first one was actually, it's a pretty balanced view here. DR in the cloud was a 30%. A lot of people look at that as a starting point. Backup as a service also coming in as a topic with 30%. And then finally, those that actually have applications living in the cloud, I think it was pretty telling, Oleg, the idea that some of it's protected, but also customers really do need to take ownership on some of aspects that perhaps AWS is not looking at explicitly. And then some that are looking at potentially other specific scenarios where you'd like a little bit more advice or discussion on as well. So why don't we exit that poll, and we'll talk a little bit about setting direction for hybrid IT. Great. So one of the things that we do with our clients is that we like to spend the time. We know each and every organization is unique, but what we would work through is really an opportunity to discuss your unique hybrid IT whiteboard session. And this is really where you would work with the likes of someone like Oleg or with Mike Lucas to really go through and review your specific business goals, take a look at some of the drivers, and then actually look at the hybrid IT stages of adoption and start to plot a high-level path that helps you to set direction, either so that you can socialize that with your organization, have a good view of where you're actually going to go with things. So we'll welcome you to take part in that session and join one of our subject matter experts so they can share with you what they're seeing from their customers, but more importantly, get a better sense of some of your key priorities and how that might align to where you're going as a business. So we would welcome questions at this point. We had a good question come in from Stan. Question was really around how it was really around sort of the, I believe, backup to tape, and the one backup to cloud, and it was how does 1 petabyte convert to 100 petabytes? So maybe just a little bit of color on sort of the deduplication model, and that's sort of still at play within the solution. Oleg, I think that might be best targeted to you, yeah?
Yeah, the simple answer is that it's magic. I'm just kidding. What it really is it's a very efficient algorithm, deduplication algorithm that uses variable segment processing in order to very intelligently be able to understand which blocks and which bits down to the bit level are unique versus not so unique. And of course, this could probably be an hour conversation on its own. But because of this incredible deduplication algorithm that Data Domain has, that Dell EMC has, it is able to really reduce the amount of data that you would normally see without that deduplication. And so that's really how we get from 100 petabytes down to 1 petabyte of space being taken up on the actual appliances or in the virtual instance.
Thanks, Oleg. And if that didn't answer your question, feel free to chime in and we'll try and go a little bit deeper. Question coming in from Chuck here. Chuck, hopefully I've captured this correctly. He mentioned that we talked a lot about some of the different scenarios, but we didn't really talk about the relationship of direct connect, and maybe just to frame the question a bit, probably this is relevant for Mike. What are some of the considerations around direct connect? And first off, maybe Mike, for those that aren't aware, what is direct connect in AWS and how that might be applicable to the conversation today?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the age-old arguments against cloud is its integration with your on-premise infrastructure. A lot of applications, they just need low latency. You're thinking databases would be one example, but just any application that requires low latency between resources. I think traditionally people have thought, well, public cloud is too far away. Well, Direct Connect is actually this service from AWS where you're able to, depending on location, but obviously pretty much every data center would have this capability, you would be able to get an actual fiber connection from your on-premise data center into AWS. With variable bandwidth capabilities. I think right now they offer up to 10 gigabits per second. Just manifests as an MPLS connection. So a great benefit to this would be that you're able to bypass the cost of shipping data out of a VPC in AWS, right? So with AWS, you pay for data transit. With Direct Connect, you're essentially committing to a certain level of data transit, right, with your bandwidth, but you're not paying per gigabyte anymore, which is a cost benefit. But it's also, performance benefit. Having a direct fiber connection to AWS, you're getting sub 10 millisecond latencies between on-premise and AWS, and that can be powerful.
So it sounds like it kind of boils down to the architecture conversation around like what are the needs of the application or workload, and seeing what the right mix of services. I think you mentioned at one point early stages of planning for this webinar was there's something almost over 100 different services you could leverage within the AWS platform. Correct, Mike?
Yeah, within the console itself, there's over 100 services. I think it's 108 or 109 services that can be leveraged, but those are only the ones that are visible in the console. There are a few that aren't. So there's lots to be had, and lots of ways that you can build out your infrastructure in AWS. I've even seen customers use something like Direct Connect to connect their AWS network and their on-premise network, and then have rules in place that all transit would, instead of going to the public cloud, their backhaul and going directly to the internet, would go through their Direct Connect connection and then onto their on-premise and out through their on-premise firewall, essentially making AWS an extension of their data center.
Okay. So lots of options for sure. Question here from Tim, and maybe I'll point this to you, Oleg, and Mike, maybe you can add some color as well. Feel free to add additional questions as well if you've got them at hand. What application, so just some backstory here, Tim indicated that he's just starting his cloud journey, if you will, or starting to move towards a public cloud extension. He's asking what applications should stay on-premise or should move to the cloud, and how do you make that decision? Is there kind of a black and white response that he can give to his leadership? Oleg, could you add a little bit of color to that and how you might think through that?
Yeah, well, what fun would it be if there was really a black or white answer to that question? Basically, the way that we kind of handle that sort of a discussion is by doing assessments of your environment, and everybody's environment might be different. And so from that point of view, we certainly have tools that we can leverage, some soft choice funded, some are paid engagements, but tools that we can leverage in order to help you along on that journey. And if you go back and think about that stages of adoption, that is very much the kind of things that we can help you with and move you along on the journey. I mean, it's certainly one of the biggest questions or one of the biggest decision points that we have to make in adopting this hybrid IT strategy, and that simply is what applications get to move to the cloud, and that's sort of the $64,000 question, if you will.
So it all comes down to understanding your applications and figuring and plotting the course based on potentially business drivers as well as sort of the application profile. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, Mike, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's accurate, but really, just like choosing a programming language, for any of you who've come from a software development background, you have to really consider the preferences and capabilities of the people on your team. You know, if on-premise is the comfort, then that really is. I think that holds weight. Your developers, if they're used to that, or your operations team, if they're used to that, moving to the public cloud can mean a knowledge shift. So, but outside of that, I mean, AWS has done a lot. They've really gone out of their way to remain as flexible as possible and to support nearly any workload that you might throw at it.
Okay, thanks for weighing in. And there are a few questions remaining, but we're getting to the top of the hour, so we'll probably end up just following up with you independently after the session with those. What I would like to welcome you to do on the exit of the session today, you're going to notice a questionnaire, and this really allows us to make sure that we can enhance the content in the future, and also to get a sense from you as to what type of support would you like to receive from Soft Choice as well, whether it's a hybrid IT whiteboard planning session, or would you like to kind of dip into some of the specific solutions you've heard today, and potentially just a conversation around where you want to go. So I'm going to pause there for a moment, and I'd like to thank you, Oleg and Mike, for your participation and sharing some insights today with everyone, and most especially for those that actually took time out of their day to hopefully build some additional insight, knowledge, and look at new opportunities to grow their business. We really do appreciate it here at Soft Choice, and we look forward to continuing